Hello, my name's Dakota. I'm from Squad Games, and we're going to be talking about Kill Team and climbing, and why is it difficult to understand. To understand how climbing works, we have to start at the beginning, but there's one question that I want to answer more than anything else. And that question is, how does climbing work when operatives interact with multiple terrain pieces or terrain features during a climb? This question spawns multiple other questions, and we're going to have to start at the beginning to kind of understand where I think climb is coming from. Since climbing over multiple pieces of terrain is not clearly defined in the rulebook, we have to try to judge and summarize what does it actually, how do you actually climb, right? And how does climb actually work? Some of these questions that have vexed me for a long time are, can operatives just not perform the climb if it interacts with multiple pieces of terrain? Would your operative continue its climb at no additional movement tax? Or would your operatives have to pay an additional 2 climb tax for each climb? So how does climbing work? Well, climbing is done during the reposition action. The reposition action is when your model can move one of the furthest lengths it can outside of charging. You can move your operative usually 6 inches, maybe 5, depending on your team, and possibly even 7. Some of these problems stem from the models that can innately move 7 inches. Other issues come from charging. 9-inch charges is kind of some of the crux problems where we start to see some weirdly looks like game breaking climbs, right? The other thing that we have to understand is terrain and movement, right? This is a very important rule. It is in the core rulebook, and it says operatives cannot move through terrain. They must move around, climb over, or jump off of it. One of the issues that we reach with climb is that it's only 2 sentences long, and that doesn't leave a lot of room for clarification. Luckily, we have 3 other paragraphs and 2 blurbs in the core rulebook, which are indicated here in this video. And if you're just listening to this, I will go over those, but I won't go over everything at once. An operative must be within 1 inch horizontally and 3 inches vertically of terrain that's visible to them to climb it. Each climb is treated as a minimum 2 inches vertically. So a minimum, if you're just going to climb 1 inch, it counts as 2. We need to understand dropping, because dropping actually might be more important than climb itself to understand climb, which is fascinating and funny. Dropping. Operatives drop down when they move off of terrain or after they've jumped. Ignore 2 inches of vertical distance that they drop during each action. This means a vertical drop of 2 inches or less is ignored. If they drop multiple times during an action, only 2 inches total is ignored, not 2 from each drop. This is taken just wholly separately, right? That's one of the reasons why I kind of separated all of these rules, is because when you take each rule separately, we can kind of understand the rules better. Now that we understand that we've read dropping and we've read climbing, we're going to go back to our example. So here is the example in question. The operative moves up for 2 inches until it's above the highest point it must climb over. It moves across 3 inches until its base is fully past the terrain feature, then drops down for 0. So now we have to understand terrain and terrain features, because to me, terrain, the definition in Kill Team for terrain and the definition of terrain features is kind of backwards for me. Terrain is different like things that you add to terrain. So you can make a terrain accessible, you could make terrain heavy, you could make terrain light, right? Or ceiling or vantage or whatever else, blocking. A terrain feature is made up of multiple pieces of terrain. So for about a year, I read this and I was like, of course, after every time that you would drop off of something, you would then climb. But I disagree with that now, because when we look at this specifically, this text is only referencing what this Marine is actually doing. It's not a core rule that every time, it doesn't say every time a model drops or comes off of terrain, you must drop, right? Or over a terrain feature. or terrain itself. Because when we go back to climb, climb specifically says whenever an operative must be within 1 inch horizontally and 3 inches vertically of terrain that's visible to them. Terrain is different than terrain features. This is prefacing a terrain feature. So this Marine is climbing up a terrain feature, which is a single unit of terrain, right? Which has the light keyword. So he's moving up the 2 inches, moving over and dropping. It's a total of 3 inches of vertical distance or horizontal distance and 2 inches vertically. So they move for a total of 5 inches. Now, I think this is very important to understand going forward because there are multiple, like, how does it work when a model's climbing multiple terrain features and multiple pieces of terrain, right? It doesn't say. So we're going to go over that. We're going to first start with the crux of this argument. Can a model move over the rubble pile lengthways? We just saw that a model can move over it shortways, right? So now we're going to look at this from our model cam. So we've just looked at it, and this operative, if he's right against it, can move up 2 inches and move 3 inches over. So how does it work when a model needs to move over it lengthwise? Well, it should be able to climb it because it is terrain, it is terrain features, and now we're moving nearly a 5-inch move. Well, it would be a 5-inch move in this direction. I'm sure that you could cut it differently, right? We could do this climb, but at this climb, we're looking at, front of the base. This is a 32 mil model, so it's not a 25 millimeter model. So since it's 3 inches in length, he would have to move the extra. So it would have to be a 5-inch move. So this Wolf Scout would have to pretty much be base to base against this piece of terrain, move his full 7-inch move and move over. But now this goes back to charging, right? So now if we have our XV26 battlesuit over here and we have a model here, he gets an extra 2 inches of movement. So now he can move all the way over here, climbs over it. Sure, it'd probably be more efficient to move around the terrain and go across, but we're doing this for argument's sake, okay? So this model would move over here and charge the XV26 battlesuit. I think we can all agree that this is a legal move for Kill Team. Do models actually move while climbing? Or do they stay in one place and then only move the model when the model has another legal place to put their base? I think the answer is yes to this question. We see multiple images, for instance, back at climbing, where models are moving and in the middle of their climbs while they are moving, right? It's like this says they're 4 inches, even though it's not a 4-inch climb. And then you have these other models moving and then dropping. So I think it is definitely, we can extrapolate that the answer to that question is yes. Now we get to one of the harder questions. And this is weirdly that this is one of the harder questions. And it's going to lead into our main question of the video. When does a model actually drop after a climb? Well, raw, it states that an operative, when an operative moves off of terrain. But what if a model is on a different piece of terrain after it's performed its climb? What if your model's base can't legally be placed because of another piece of terrain? Is it considered the same climb to continue that climb? So we boil it down to these same questions. We run into a roadblock with climb now, right? Can your operative just not perform the climb? Would your operative continue its climb with no additional movement tax? Or would your model have to pay an additional climb tax for each one? And I think that some of it is clear and some of it, unfortunately, is not clear. So we're going to take a look at some examples here. In example number 1, we have our Space Wolf Scout here, but I believe all 6-inch operatives could do this with my proposed solution to this. There's a couple of different ways that we can think about it too. So for instance, your model, going back to climb, indicates that you have to only be within an inch to start your climb. So your model could climb this one. You could also climb this one, right? the question is like, which one is he climbing, right? Because they're both within visibility of this operative. But let's just say, for heaven's sakes, we're going to be climbing this piece of terrain. So he climbs up to the highest point, and actually the highest point to clear it could be up to 2 inches, right? So let's say he climbs 2 inches tall, right? And then he moves here. There's no legal place for this model to now drop. Okay, he's charging here. So let's say this model continues to move, and now we run into another piece of wall. Do you have to pay another climb tax? Because, or are you still in the same climb? You were still climbing here. You're climbing here. Why would this not also be the same climb? He is still climbing. There's no legal place for you to place your model. The model cannot end its climb if it cannot have a legal place. It's either that or this move is illegal. So if he's moved 2 inches tall, he does clear this wall. He can continue his charge to move to here. As we can see, this move is, I believe, 6 inches. With a 2-inch climb, that is an 8-inch charge. He's within control range of this operative. So an argument could be made that since the model was not within 1 inch of this piece of terrain, that when he started his climb back here, you may have to climb again here to continue the climb because it's not within control range to start the climb. But in the same argument, you can say, well, the operative is climbing. He's still climbing. The rules specify each climb must be treated with a minimum of 2 inches vertically, right? So if he's still doing the same climb, then it's not a separate climb. So the model should be able to continue their climb and end to here. We're going to go over a few other examples to see how much more funky we can make this. Now, there's another one, since we saw that was a 6-inch and 8-inch climb, right? If somebody places a razor wire right here, which is less than 2 inches tall, right? This operative could still move over the top of all of these and still land because the back of the base is still less than 6 inches. So let's show this. So if we measure from back of the base to back of the base, as we can see, right, this operative can still land onto this side, even though he's crossed this piece of razor wire, right? Now, if you wanted to make this illegal, you'd probably have to place it like so, because now the operative can't land or like so, but maybe he can land here and then make a shot, because he's within 3 inches, yada, yada. Okay, that's besides the point. But we can see even with equipment terrain placed in cheesy ways, operatives should still be able to climb over it because there is no legal place to drop. You only drop from terrain when you move off of it. Let's go over another scenario. Let's say there's a wolf scout or any other operative out here. Let's say this operative wants to charge this operative. Okay, the quickest way to get around would be just to charge, but by some readings of the rules, players would say that you have to climb this, drop because you're moving off of terrain, and climb this. Even though the operative would be within an inch, or even if the model started the climb without an inch. Let's say you started your climb right where this operative is, because he's within an inch. So he starts his climb, and now he's moving this way, and you run into this wall, and you're still climbing, and you're within an inch of this wall. You would continue climbing because you could move 2 inches up and then continue to move and then drop your model and then land here, right? Or your model would drop and in a legal position, right? Let's say here, and then continue its move in its reposition action or charge action to fight said operative. This is another easy indication of, some people would say that this is toxic, right? I disagree. I think that players, when you think about it, being like, I am going to do this, I think this is much more like, I'm going to make sure you can never, ever get to my objective in this stronghold. I'm going to put these 2 pieces of terrain outside of 2 inches so that you can never, ever climb here to get to my operative. That's never something that's going to be able to happen because I've completely blocked you with pieces of terrain. Sure, that's part of the game. But also, if you take the same interpretation that I have with climbing, this is also part of the game. In fact, this gives everyone like pseudo boost from Murder Wing. And if you play this way, it opens up Volcus so much more than any other interpretation that I've ever seen for this rule. Hopefully, I have made it beyond a reasonable doubt, if we're in the court of law here, being rules lawyers, that your operative could climb without an additional tax. I will shoot down another argument that I have that I made for myself, that since your operative would start moving, and it wouldn't start your climb within the inch of the extra wall that was 3 inches away, well, there's a big hole in that logic, right? Climbing doesn't say at the start of your reposition action. It doesn't say at the start of a climb. It just says an operative must be wholly within 1 and 3 inches of that terrain piece or terrain to climb it, right? So it's not saying that you have to start. It doesn't have an indication of when a climb should start, how a climb should end, or anything. This is all we have to work with. So we have to extrapolate the complicated rule as to what is climb and how to climb. All right, I have some other silly shenanigans for everyone. So we've gone over some climbing stuff. So we're going to start off with our operative here. So we can summarize. This is kind of how I came to all these conclusions. So if this operative can move from here to here, right? We discussed that earlier. Then the operative can go from here to here. Why could the operative not go from here to here during a charge? This is 2.1 inches tall, so it would cost 3 inches. This is a 6-inch move, okay? Front of the base to front of the base, okay? So this would be a 9-inch charge, very legal, right? Of course, it would be better to move around, but we're just arguing for arguing's sakes, okay? Let's say an operative was here. Could this operative, if all these are legal, why wouldn't this also be legal? So this operative can perform a charge. There's no legal place to put his model in this whole charge. So he could move from here and, you know, move along this parkour across this wall and then end in charge range here. As long as your base does not have a legal place to drop, I do believe that you can just move along walls similar to old Traverse. In the last edition, we had this rule called Traverse. We have a couple more questions to get through, so let's continue on with the video. Can a model start a climb during a climb? I think we've answered this as yes earlier on, right? So, you know, all it says about climbing is it must be within 1 inch horizontally and 3 inches vertically of terrain that's visible to them to climb it. Each climb is treated as a minimum of 2 inches. Now, if you're already in a climb, I don't think the definition is that that you have to start another climb. What does this thought process lead us to? Large ruins are over 3 inches tall. Thus, they do not meet the requirement for climb. You have to have terrain that is within 3 inches vertically and 1 inch horizontally. So if a model was here, they could not climb it. So they'd have to come over to one of the walls and then climb. There's many maps that have these pieces of terrain or the little ruined walls that are kind of near or under this or the rubble pile that's underneath these things, right? Now, this model could, in theory, start its climb from here, move 0.25 inches up, and then continue its climb to this vantage, because since the model is moving along its path, it can continue moving and it can continue to climb and get to the top of this piece of terrain. Can a model climb downwards? That is the question. By dictionary, Webster's dictionary, right? Vertically, within 3 inches is describing a vertical separation that does not require a direction, right? So it just says within 3 inches vertically, which means that it could mean an up or down difference that is 3 inches or less, right? So it doesn't only say upwards. So technically, rules as written, you can. But why did I write no for raw, rules as intended, and RAR, right? Drop seems to be the way that the game designers in Games Workshop have made for you to move off of terrain. There is a specific rule in the core rulebook that indicates when you're moving off of terrain, you would drop, right? That's what it says. It doesn't say you could climb down. It just says when you move off of terrain, you drop, which is specific on page 55 from the pull down list. It tells you when a core rule like is contradicting itself, you go with something that says specifically. And it specifically says when models drop off of terrain, when they come off of terrain, you drop. It doesn't say you can drop. It says you drop, right? So we get to our final question of the video. Can models wall run, airwalk around terrain? For instance, let's say we have our Wolf Scout operative here. Let's say there is an XV-26 battlesuit. This is one of the only operatives that can do this, unless if you're fighting against ratlings that are very small, right? This is one of the interpretations, right? So wall running and airwalking is something like this. Well, I'm going to use my jump pack ploy, which makes climbing and dropping free, right? I have a 6-inch move. So we're going to say like this is the 6-inch move. A wall run or airwalk is something all the way up here. You move around here and then you would drop. And you'd be outside of 1 for argument's sake, right? Outside of 1, you started off also outside of 1, right? Bada bing, bada boom. If I could not hit my own models. That is an airwalk. You know, could you start climbing here? Now, climb does indicate that you just have to be within 1 inch. 1 inch to start your climb, right? But there is specific wording. Once again, it does say operatives cannot when operatives are interacting with terrain from the core rule page, the core rule book of page 56. Operatives cannot move through terrain. They must move around, climb over, or jump off of it. And in my interpretation, when they're saying climb over, they're indicating that climb is meant to go over terrain. Your model's meant to cross pieces of terrain rather than just saying, hey, my model's going to move around on the outside of it. That doesn't necessarily make logical sense. This whole video has been about logic. How can we extrapolate climb in a logical sense, right? This, while cool and while funny, I don't think is particularly like a logical argument, right? Of saying like your model could do this. Sure, the rules say so, but there are other small indications saying that your models cannot, right? Because again, climb over terrain. We're not climbing over. Now you could say, hey, I'm here. The model's, let's move this. You could say like, hey, my goal is to climb this piece of terrain. Sure, you climb all the way up here with your jetpack ploy, and then you move over here. Sure, you're climbing over something, and then you land over. Let's say you use this angle and you move and you drop into a legal position that's outside of 1 inch. If you can find that and it's within your range to do so, I don't see why not. You know, but you're not doing Spider-Man. You know, just in the middle of the air. Because if we go to that same argument, okay, I'm within 1 inch of this wall. Now I'm going to move all the way over here and drop. I mean, you're dropping off of terrain. From this, you're also never on terrain. So technically you would never drop, right? Drop literally indicates, well, then you could say, well, I'm just going to climb down, right? If you're trying to be like weird, but that's not the case. You know, like this is not a legal move. I think there's one other piece that we should go over, and that's climbing with ladders currently, right? Okay, so we have this look at a ladder. Is this legal, right? There's a lot of people that say this is not legal, right? They're strictly not following rules as written. If this was not legal, we would have seen an update in the FAQ, but let's explain why this is a legal climb where you could use the ladder from this side of the wall to climb up to here. Okay. So, the enemy player has placed this ladder against a piece of terrain that's greater than 2 inches in height. Okay. So as we can see, this piece of terrain right here is greater than 2 inches in height. So he placed the ladder here to help his models, let's say his Wolf Scouts, climb over. Okay. Um, this part of the terrain is less than 2 inches tall. Okay. So you have a model here, according to the core rules, for the purposes of control range, right, which the ladders specifically call out, you ignore the walls for visibility on control range. That means when you measure from the base to the piece of equipment of terrain, you're within control range. So that means you could start your climb from here as long as you have your climb within an inch. You can climb continually, and then you could move on to the vantage, right? For 1 inch. This is a legal climb currently in the rules. Hopefully this video made sense. Hopefully you understand climb, hopefully as good as I do, right? Is it weird? Yes. Yes, it is. Is it not fundamentally like, did you come to the same conclusions? Is it just me that didn't understand it? Or do you disagree with my conclusions on how climb works? I hope that Games Workshop will provide an FAQ at some point in the future about how climb works and how climb functions with multiple pieces of terrain. But I do think the rules are clear when you have a deeper understanding of how climb works. If we just separate out climb and separate drop, and we understand the definitions of terrain and terrain features, I think that it is clear that this is how climb works in general on Kill Team. If you liked the video, make sure to leave us a thumbs up. Don't forget to check out our Patreon, where we provide battle reports and we provide a bunch of behind the scenes things and stuff like that. And if you are ever coming to one of our events, make sure you come and say hi to either me, Jock, or Saya. We would love to meet you. And thank you for supporting the channel and giving this video a watch. Until next time, everyone.